The prestigious international school Barron Trump attended was not the warmest welcome from day one. The children of politicians, businessmen, diplomats, and the elite from all over the world attended, but none of them caused as much gossip as he did. People whispered in the hallways behind him, discussing his every move, and anonymous posts appeared on social media mocking the fact that he most likely got a place at the school not because of his knowledge, but because of his last name. Barron noticed this, but he didn't show it. He was used to the increased attention and understood that the only way to change the opinions of others was not with words, but with actions. The first day of classes had been relatively calm, but when he walked into his cybersecurity class, the tension in the air was almost palpable. Professor Harrison, a strict and demanding professor known for his penchant for challenging problems, was surveying the class. He stood at the board and made it clear that this course would test even the brightest of students. Barron took a seat at the back of the room, but before he could open his laptop, he heard a quiet laugh from the row next to him. "Seriously? Barron Trump in a cybersecurity class?" a mocking voice said. Barron turned to see two guys, tall, skinny, with confident smiles. Marco and Daniel Rivera, twin brothers, were known as the best programmers in the school. They won all the hacking and programming competitions, and their skills were considered outstanding. They had already decided that Barron was no threat to them. "I wonder," Marco continued, grinning. "Maybe he'll just pay someone to do the job for him? Or he'll ask his dad to give him administrative access to all our grades," Daniel added, and the whole class laughed. Barron didn't answer. He just glanced at them briefly and calmly turned on his laptop. He didn't need to prove anything with words, he had other plans. Professor Harrison interrupted all conversations by knocking on the table. "Gentlemen, glad to have you all here. In this course you will learn the basics and advanced techniques of cybersecurity. But before we begin, I want to announce a competition." The class froze instantly. No one expected the first lesson to begin with a challenge. "In 2 weeks we will have a tournament on hacking a protected system. This is not just entertainment, it is a test of your logic, speed of thinking and ability to analyze codes in real time. The winner will get the opportunity to do an internship at one of the leading IT companies." A murmur of approval went up from the audience, and Marco and Daniel immediately looked at each other and nodded smugly. They clearly considered this competition already won. "So, Barron, are you with us?" Marco turned to him, his voice laced with mockery. "Or don't you have time between interviews and photo shoots?" Barron looked at him, smiled slightly, and replied, "Of course, I'm participating." At this point, Professor Harrison began handing out training materials, explaining the rules of the upcoming tournament. It was necessary to hack into a virtual system created by teachers and find a vulnerability in its protection. Everything was arranged in such a way that it was impossible to bypass it using a simple brute force method. Real skill was required. Barron concentrated on the materials, but he felt like someone was watching him. He turned his head and made eye contact with a girl sitting 2 rows away. Her name was Lillian Chen, but everyone called her Lily. She was one of the best students in school, but unlike the Rivera brothers, she didn't like to draw attention to herself. Her analytical mind and ability to understand code put her on par with the best, but she preferred to stay in the background. When Lily noticed Barron looking at her, she smiled slightly and whispered, "If you need help, ask. Don't listen to these two." Barron nodded, but inside he already knew what he was going to do. He wasn't going to ask for help. He was going to prove that he had been underestimated. Barron left the class determined to prepare for the competition as best he could. He knew his skills weren't nearly as advanced as those of the River brothers or Lily. But that didn't mean he couldn't catch up. He wasn't used to giving up, much less being defeated by people who had already written him off. If they thought he was just another rich dad's heir who couldn't do anything, he would prove them wrong. That evening, Barron locked himself in his room and began studying the materials that Professor Harrison had given him in class. He already knew the basics of programming, but hacking secure systems was a whole other level. He started from scratch, carefully analyzing past problems that had been used in similar competitions. He watched video tutorials, read articles about cybersecurity and how modern security algorithms work. Time flew by, and he continued to immerse himself in the world of code, encryption, and vulnerabilities. A few hours later, his laptop beeped, a new message in the school chat. It was Lily. "Do you really want to participate in the tournament?" Barron chuckled and typed in his reply. "Isn't it obvious?" A minute later, a new response came. "Do you know what you're up against? Marco and Daniel have been doing this professionally for years. They're not just programmers, they think like hackers. They leave no traces and can find vulnerabilities where others don't even notice them." Barron thought about it. He knew that his opponents were really strong, but that didn't scare him. On the contrary, it only fueled his interest. "Thanks for the warning. I'll figure it out." He was about to close his laptop when another message came through. "If you want, I can help. Not because I doubt you, but because they have already started to turn the others against you." Barron sighed. Of course, that was to be expected. He opened another chat where his classmates were discussing the upcoming competition. As he thought, there were already conversations about how he had gotten involved in this for nothing. "I can imagine how he will sit in front of the screen and not understand what to do. Maybe he should just ask his dad to buy him a victory? It's surprising that he even knows how to turn on a computer." Barron felt anger boiling inside him. He knew that if he lost, it would only confirm their ridicule. But if he won, he imagined their faces when his name was announced as the winner. The image gave him strength. He opened the chat with Lily again. "Let's work together. I don't just want to participate. I want to win." That's how his nightly training began. Lily turned out to be a real expert in cybersecurity. She explained how different types of protection work, how hackers find weak spots in systems, and what mistakes programmers most often make. Together, they analyzed last year's tasks, simulated hacks, and looked for unconventional approaches. Barron quickly realized that in this world, it wasn't just the knowledge of programming languages that was important, but the ability to think outside the box. He began analyzing the code, looking for loopholes, trying new methods to bypass protection. Lily was amazed at his ability to grasp the material quickly. "You have the mind of a real analyst," she said one night. "You don't just see the code, you see the whole system. That's important." Barron didn't answer, but confidence was growing inside him. He knew he had a lot of work ahead of him, but he was no longer the guy everyone thought was incompetent. With only a few days left before the competition, Lily suggested that he do the final check. "I'll create a security system for you, and you'll try to hack it. If you can do it, then you're ready." Barron nodded. He knew this was his last test before the big challenge. He sat down at the computer, opened the program, and began working. Each action required extreme concentration. He tried one method, then another, then a third. The minutes passed, but he did not give up. An hour later, he finally found the vulnerability. His heart started beating faster. He entered the command, checked the result, and suddenly he had access. He did it. He hacked the system. A message from Lily appeared on the screen. "Congratulations. Now you're ready." Barron smiled. He knew he had a real test ahead of him. But now he felt like he had a chance. A real chance to prove everyone wrong. The day of the competition arrived. The air was tense, and Barron could feel his classmates' eyes watching his every move. He walked into the large classroom that had been converted into a cyber testing center and saw that everything was ready: long tables with powerful computers, large screens displaying the competition, and Professor Harrison standing in the center of the room with a tablet in his hands. He was looking over the list of participants and occasionally glancing at the students, as if gauging their mood for the upcoming test. "Welcome," he announced loudly. "Today you will face a task that will require not only technical knowledge, but also the ability to think outside the box. Your goal will be to hack a secure system that our faculty has developed. But don't think that everything will be easy. This system uses the most modern methods of protection, and only those who are able to find unconventional solutions will be able to pass it." Barron looked around. Marco and Daniel Rivera were sitting in the front rows, watching the others with smug grins. Their confidence was unshakable. They already considered themselves winners, and they were probably convinced that Barron was nothing more than an extra in this competition. "I'm giving you 3 hours," the professor continued. "Your goal is to gain full administrative access to the system. As soon as someone succeeds, the competition will automatically end. If no one succeeds after the time has elapsed, the winner is the one who is closest to the goal." The screen flickered, and the first task appeared, a simple authentication system. Barron concentrated, ignoring the whispers and stares from the sidelines. He watched as his classmates began to quickly enter commands, analyzing the code. The Rivera brothers were already moving on to the next step, but Barron was in no hurry. He decided to first understand how the system was designed, what its weak points were, and only then act. The first defense was simple: standard password encryption. Barron quickly wrote a script that allowed him to bypass it, and moved on to the second level. Here, the system was more complex. It analyzed hacking attempts and blocked the user if he made too many incorrect requests. But he already knew how to deal with this. Lily had helped him figure out such algorithms a few days before the competition. He found a way to slow down the system without causing it to automatically block, and successfully passed the second level. It had only been half an hour, but he was already starting to catch up with the leaders. He glanced at the results screen. Marco and Daniel were ahead, but their lead was not as significant as he had expected. They were clearly following the standard route, using proven methods, while Barron was looking for unconventional loopholes. Another hour passed. The class was filled with tension. Some participants were already giving up, realizing that they could not go any further. Barron, however, was delving deeper into the code. He felt his mind working at its limit, analyzing the system's defenses and constructing possible ways to bypass them. He remembered one of the methods Lily had mentioned and decided to try it. He opened the system's core code and saw that the administrators had left a hidden backup in case of failure. This was his opportunity. If he could insert his script into this backup, he would gain full access, bypassing the final stages of protection. He began making changes carefully, monitoring every step. There were 20 minutes left until the end of the competition. The only sound in the room was the sound of keyboards. The Rivera brothers were already celebrating their victory, thinking that they were close to the final. But suddenly the screen lit up with a new message. "Access granted? Administrator B. Trump." Barron blinked, not believing his eyes. He had done it. He had hacked the system first. He had beaten everyone else. The room went silent. Everyone turned to the screen, where his name was clearly displayed. "It's impossible," Daniel muttered. Marco clenched his fists, not believing what was happening. Professor Harrison, who had been watching the competition all this time, rose slowly from his seat. "Congratulations, Barron," he said with a slight smile. "You didn't just hack the system, you did it in a way no one expected." The class exploded with discussion. No one could believe what had just happened. Barron, who everyone thought was just the president's son, was the best among them. He had not only won the competition, but had also proven that his intelligence and abilities were worthy of respect. A tense silence fell over the room. All eyes were glued to the large screen, where the line, "Access granted? Administrator B. Trump," was displayed in black and white. Even those who had not been following the competition initially now turned to the screen with expressions of amazement. No one had expected this outcome, especially the Rivera brothers, who were already confident of their victory. Marco slowly leaned back in his chair, his fingers curling into fists. He blinked several times, trying to process what had just happened. Daniel, who had been typing in commands to bypass the last layer of protection, stood there in disbelief, his hands hovering over the keyboard. "This is some kind of mistake," Marco muttered, his voice shaking with anger. "This can't be true." Daniel turned to Professor Harrison, hoping for confirmation of his words. "We were ahead. It's impossible." His voice was sharp, almost hysterical. "Did he hack the system illegally?" Professor Harrison, who had been silently watching the proceedings, stood up calmly and walked over to the server, where detailed logs of all the participants' actions were displayed. He nodded several times, checking Barron's code, and then, turning to the audience, announced loudly. The hack was clean. No violations, no illegal methods. Barron used a vulnerability that none of you noticed. A low hum swept through the room. Many of the students looked at each other, some with admiration, others with obvious irritation. The Rivera brothers looked as if they had just been humiliated in front of the entire school. They had been convinced that they were the best, that no one could surpass them in this art. But Barron had done it. Barron sat in his seat, maintaining an outward calm. He could feel the eyes on him, but he did not allow himself to smile smugly. A mixture of emotions raged inside him: relief, satisfaction, but most of all, a sense of justice. He had not come here to prove anything to anyone but himself. And he had succeeded. "How did you do that?" one of the students suddenly asked. Barron turned his head and saw Lily looking at him with a slight smile. She didn't look surprised, rather proud. "I found a vulnerability in the backup system," he replied calmly. "There was a hidden access that was supposed to be used to restore data in case of failure. Instead of going the standard route, I used this bypass route and gained complete control." Professor Harrison nodded, smiling with satisfaction. "This is how real cybersecurity experts think. They don't just break down defenses, they find weak spots that no one thought about. Congratulations, Barron, you've proven that you deserve your place here." Someone in the audience began clapping. At first it was just a few students, but soon the applause spread throughout the entire room. It wasn't just recognition, it was respect. Even those who had previously laughed at Barron couldn't deny the obvious. He hadn't just won, he had done it brilliantly. The Rivera brothers, unable to bear the humiliation, abruptly stood up from their seats. "Better luck next time," Marco said with a grin, clearly hiding his disappointment under a mask of indifference. Daniel remained silent, but his gaze was filled with anger. They left the room, but their defeat would remain in the memory of all who witnessed that moment. Lily walked closer and sat down next to Barron. "I knew you could do it," she said. Barron shrugged, still processing what had happened a little. "They underestimated me. Let this be a lesson to them." Lily laughed. "I think they will look at you completely differently now." Barron didn't answer. He knew that from that day on his reputation had changed. He was no longer just the president's son. He was now someone who had proven that he could succeed on his own, without a family name, without status, without patronage. And that was just the beginning. The school was still discussing Barron Trump's sensational victory in the system hacking competition for a long time. Even those who had previously laughed at him were now watching him with interest, trying to understand how he had managed to so confidently bypass everyone, including the most experienced hackers in the school. But Barron himself was not trying to enjoy his triumph. He understood that in such situations it was important not to become arrogant, but to continue moving forward, confirming his abilities not with words, but with deeds. The next day, he walked into his cybersecurity class and noticed that the atmosphere had changed noticeably. No one was looking at him with arrogance, no one was making snide comments. On the contrary, many of the students looked intrigued, and some even openly admired. Among them were those who, just a few days earlier, had openly laughed at his attempt to enter the competition. Professor Harrison walked into the classroom, looked around at everyone present, and paused briefly before beginning the lesson. "I think yesterday was a very educational day for all of us," he began, looking from one student to another. "Especially for those who are used to jumping to conclusions." Some of the students looked down, realizing that the remark was directed at them. Barron just chuckled slightly, but said nothing. "But now I want to talk not about the winner, but about what it means to be a truly strong specialist in cybersecurity," Harrison continued. "It's not just a question of technical skills, but also the ability to find unconventional solutions, to think broader than most. Barron showed us that even when you are considered an outsider, you can always find your way to victory." Barron felt the eyes on him again, but now there was no mockery in them, only respect. Some found it hard to admit, but even the most prejudiced students could not deny his achievements. After the class, several people approached him. Among them were old acquaintances and those who had never even bothered to talk to him before. "Hey, Barron, great performance yesterday," one of the guys said, extending his hand. "I thought you'd just give up after level 2, but you surprised us all." Barron shook his hand, nodding. "Thank you," he replied. "I was just doing something that really interests me." Several more students approached them, and then Marco and Daniel. Barron didn't know what to expect, but he was prepared for any development. Marco looked at him with a slight smirk, but his eyes no longer held the same self-confidence as before. "Okay, I admit it," he said. "We underestimated you. You outplayed us all." Daniel, who was standing nearby, nodded. "It was cool," he added. "Even if we didn't like it." Barron shrugged. "Everyone makes mistakes," he answered calmly. "Next time, I think you'll learn from it." The brothers looked at each other and then laughed. "Yeah, we definitely won't underestimate you now," Marco said. "But don't relax. Next time we'll beat you." Barron chuckled. "Let's see." After that, the situation at school changed completely. Now he was no longer perceived as just the president's son. He proved that his name was not only fame, but also his own abilities, intelligence, and desire to win. Lily approached him later that day. "You did a great job," she said. "And most importantly, you stayed yourself." Barron nodded. "Well, you played your part too. I wouldn't have managed without your advice." Lily smiled. "So, next time we will work together. And the next tournament, by the way, is in 2 months." Barron looked at her and smiled back. "Then it's time for us to get ready."